Unaware they'd one day become multi-billionaires, he abandoned wife and newborn triplets for a wealthy mistress. What happened next will leave you speechless. He didn't just leave his family. He did it while his wife was in a hospital bed, legs numb, monitors beeping, 3 premature heartbeats fighting on the screen. Ethan Reed stood in that bright hallway, phone buzzing in his pocket. Through the glass, Grace gripped the rails of the bed, whispering, "He's coming back, right?" Outside, a sleek black car idled at the curb. Behind the wheel sat Vanessa Cole, a wealthy investor with cold, steady eyes. "Triplets will drown you," she murmured through the open window. "Come with me, and you'll never worry about diapers or rent again." He looked once at the maternity ward doors, then turned his back. "I can't do this," Ethan whispered, and climbed into Vanessa's car, leaving his wife and newborn triplets to face the world without him. What he didn't know was this: the woman he abandoned wasn't just Grace Reed. She was Grace Hale, a strange daughter of a powerful magnate, and the 3 tiny babies he called too much would grow up to build an empire worth billions. With no place in it for him, the night he walked away from 3 extra mouths was the night he unknowingly cut himself off from a dynasty. This isn't just a story about a man leaving a hospital. It's about what happens when someone abandons the family they think will hold them back, only to watch those same burdens rise higher than they ever dreamed. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like leaving Grace alone in that hospital all over again. When you click that button, you stand with every parent who stayed and every child who was left but still rose. Please, subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The office felt too small for 3 babies. Grace Reed braced both hands on the edge of her cluttered desk as another sharp kick hit her ribs. Papers trembled under her fingers. Invoices slid over one another like restless waves in the harsh fluorescent light. The air was dry, humming with old computers and low phone chatter. But inside her chest, everything felt loud, tight, urgent. She was 29, 8 months pregnant with triplets, and every breath felt like it had to fight for space. Her doctor had warned her to take it easy, maybe stop working, but take it easy. Didn't pay rent. "Just a little longer, okay?" she whispered, rubbing her round belly in slow circles. "Mama's almost done." On the outside, she looked like any tired office assistant at a small logistics firm. Simple blouse, cheap flats, hair twisted into a quick knot, a smudge of ink on her wrist from a leaking pen. Her desk was crammed with file boxes, staplers, and a budget calculator that froze if she hit more than 3 keys at once. But her life had not started in cramped offices and overdue bills. Before she was Grace Reed, she had been Grace Hale. As a child, she'd walked factory floors in shoes that never saw dust. Her father, Richard Hale, would hold her small hand and point at giant machines and long lines of workers. "All this will be yours to manage one day," he used to tell her. "You have the mind for it." Her mother had been softer, quieter. She'd sit beside Grace in a sunny room with high windows and lay out financial newspapers, tracing patterns in the headlines. There were no late fees then. No rent threats, just lessons about stocks, supply chains, and legacy. At 16, Grace knew what a merger was. At 18, she had a seat at the far end of her father's boardroom table, listening to men in suits argue over numbers. At 20, she was expected to wear certain dresses, smile at certain sons of certain partners. At 22, she ran. She ran from the mansions, from the gold doors, from the heavy name Hale that turned every friendship into a performance. She took cash, not cards, sold jewelry, not shares. She kept only one thing from that old life: a small silver pendant with the Hale family crest, symbol of an empire that never stopped watching her. She made herself a promise: the next man who loved her would love Grace, not Hale. That was the man she married, Ethan Reed, 31. Charming, funny, ambitious in a raw, unpolished way. When she met him, he worked in sales, full of big talk and nervous energy. He bought her cheap coffee instead of diamonds. He laughed about being broke and swore he'd make it big one day. When she hinted that she had no rich family to fall back on, he'd shrugged and said he didn't care. She never told him that she did. Her phone buzzed on the desk, dragging her back into the bright office. The screen flashed. "Ethan." Husband Grace exhaled and answered, pressing the phone to her ear with ink-stained fingers. "Hey," she said, injecting a smile into her voice. "You at work?" Ethan's reply came tight and already raised. "Yeah, and about to lose my mind. The landlord called me again. He wants this month's rent by Friday. Grace, we don't have it." Her gaze flicked to the stack of invoices in front of her. Extra hours meant extra pay, a small bump that might keep them from being thrown out. Her lower back throbbed, but she couldn't say no when her manager asked her to stay late. "I know," she said softly. "I'm picking up overtime here. We'll figure it out, Ethan." "My commission this month was a joke," he snapped. "Nobody's buying. I'm out there all day, and what do we have to show? A used couch and a car that barely starts." She swallowed. "We have a family," she reminded him gently. "We have 3 little lives coming." There was a short, sharp laugh, half joke, half bitter. "You sure we need 3 of them, Grace?" Ethan said. "One would have been cheaper." Grace forced a weak smile no one could see, a tiny laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't say that," she whispered. "They can hear you, you know." He sighed loudly, muttered something about his lunch break being over and needing to get back to chasing people who don't want to spend money, then hung up. Grace lowered the phone and stared at the dark screen. Across from her, a woman leaned against a filing cabinet, chewing the end of a pen. Rachel, 28, was Grace's closest friend at work, the kind of person who saw everything, but pretended not to until you clearly needed her. "You okay?" Rachel asked. "You went pale when you answered." Grace straightened a pile of invoices, willing her breathing to steady. "Just Ethan, he's stressed." Rachel watched her for a moment, then lowered her voice. "You sound stressed too," she said, "and your accent is trying to come out again." Grace blinked. "What?" Rachel hopped up to sit on the edge of the desk. "Sometimes," she said, "when you're tired, you don't sound like the rest of us. It's cleaner, like you had private tutors or something. Like you grew up around money." Grace's hand moved without thinking, fingers closing around the small pendant at her neck. The metal was warm from her skin. The tiny crest, a crown over a shield, pressed into her fingertips. "That was a long time ago," she said quietly. "Doesn't matter now." Rachel's eyes dropped to the necklace. "You always wear that thing," she said. "What is it?" "Just something from my mother," Grace said quickly. "Old and ugly. Not worth anything." That was a lie and a truth. The metal itself wasn't unusual, but the symbol, the Hale crest, was stamped on every crate, contract, and letter Richard Hale sent. Letters he'd kept sending even after his daughter vanished years ago. Letters she shoved into drawers without opening. As if summoned by the thought, her phone buzzed again. Different tone, different contact. Richard Hale. Office. Grace's heart lurched. She turned the phone over, as if hiding the screen could hide the name. Rachel caught the look, then caught the words. Her eyes widened. "Wait. Hale? As in, please don't." Grace cut in, sharper than she meant. Rachel went still. "I told you," Grace whispered. "I'm Grace Reed now." The phone vibrated on the desk until the call ended. The silence afterward felt heavier than the ringing. "Is that your father?" Rachel asked quietly. Grace stared at the dark screen, jaw tight. "It doesn't matter," she breathed. "He belongs to a world I left. I chose this one. This one, with overdue rent and a husband who joked that their children were too expensive." The office printer whirred. Someone laughed by the coffee machine. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Normal sounds, ordinary life. But Grace felt the old world pressing at the edges, thick and invisible. She turned back to her invoices. Numbers blurred. Every time she blinked, she saw the crest on her pendant, the same symbol on letters she'd never opened. By 5:30, her lower back screamed, her feet ached, and the babies rolled and kicked like they were protesting the cramped space. She shut down her computer and gathered her things. "Text me when you get home, okay?" Rachel said as they walked to the exit. "If Ethan gives you a hard time, come stay with me. I mean it." Grace managed a small smile. "He's just scared." "I am too." They stepped into the lobby. A muted TV hung high on the wall, playing a business interview with subtitles. Grace wasn't looking, she was thinking about bus routes and how long she could keep working before the doctor insisted she stop. Then Rachel stopped walking. "Grace," she whispered. "Look." Grace followed her gaze. On the screen sat a dignified older man in a dark suit, gray hair neatly combed, eyes like sharpened glass. The caption read, "Industrial magnate Richard Hale speaks on legacy and succession." He was older, more lined, but unmistakable. Her father. The sound was low, but the subtitles crawled across the bottom. "The future of this company depends on who carries the name after me." Grace's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. One hand held her belly, the other clenched her bag strap. Behind her, someone pushed open the glass door, letting in a rush of cold air. Phones rang upstairs. Life went on. But in that second, her world narrowed to two things: the babies kicking inside her, and the man on the screen talking about heirs as if she'd never existed. "You never told me he was that Richard Hale," Rachel breathed. "Grace, that man owns half the factories in this country." Grace dragged her eyes from the screen and forced her feet to move. "I told you," she said, voice thin, "that life is not mine anymore." The glass door closed behind her with a soft thud. As she walked toward the bus stop, her phone buzzed in her bag, a message from Ethan about a meeting he had to attend tomorrow with some big investors. She didn't open it. Back in the lobby, hidden by walls and glass, Richard Hale leaned toward the camera and, according to the subtitles, said, "The question is not whether there will be an heir. The question is whether they will choose to claim their place." Grace had no idea that the man panicking about rent on her phone and the man talking about heirs on that screen were about to collide in a way that would split her life in two. Bills hit the table so hard the glasses rattled. Ethan Reed stood over the small dining table in their cramped apartment, chest heaving, fists clenched. Late notices, red stamps, and crumpled envelopes were spread out like accusations. "I'm working myself to the bone, and it's never enough," he exploded. "Look at this, Grace. Just look at it. How are we supposed to raise 3 kids like this?" Grace stood by the counter, one hand on the laminate edge, the other pressed against her belly. The triplets turned inside her, reacting to the stress. She winced and tried to keep her voice calm. She had walked home with the image of her father on the lobby TV burning in her mind. She had not told Ethan about that. She had not told him about the name Hale at all. "We'll manage," she said softly. "We always do." "On what?" Ethan jabbed a finger at the bills. "Hope? My commission this month was garbage. Nobody's buying. The landlord called me twice. He wants rent by Friday." "I can go back to work part-time after they're born," she said. "Rachel thinks the office might let me do some hours from home. I'll figure something out." Rachel had texted her earlier. "Try to rest. If you need a break, my couch is always here." Grace had smiled at the screen and put the phone away. She didn't want another couch. She wanted this home to work. Ethan dragged a hand through his hair. "3 babies," he muttered. "3." He picked up an envelope and crushed it in his fist. "You sure we need 3 of them?" he said again, half joking, half cruel. "One would have been cheaper." Grace's hand flew to her stomach, protective. "Don't say that," she whispered. "They didn't ask to be here." For a moment, guilt flickered over his face. Then it soured into frustration. "You always wear that ugly little thing," he said, glaring at the pendant. "Why don't you sell it or pawn it? At least then it would be useful." Grace's fingers closed around the crest. "It was my mother's," she said. "It's not worth anything to anyone else." The metal itself might not fetch much. The symbol on it, though, opened doors Ethan had never heard of. Grace had chosen to slam those doors herself. She wasn't about to open them because the landlord was impatient. Ethan exhaled harshly and dropped into a chair. The storm in his voice became a low, bitter rumble. "My manager's dragging me to some investor thing tomorrow night," he said. "Big product launch. Fancy people. He thinks I'll network." He flexed his fingers in the air quotes. "Like anyone there wants to talk to the guy who can't pay his rent." "Maybe it'll help," Grace said, moving to stack the bills. "Maybe you'll meet someone. Make a good impression." He let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, maybe I'll dump gravy on someone's $1,000 shoes. Even inside the sarcasm, there was a spark, a tiny, hungry wish. Grace rested a hand on his shoulder. You're better than you think, she said quietly. You can talk to anyone. It's one of the things I love about you. He leaned into her touch for a second, then pulled away. I'm going to bed, he muttered. Early start tomorrow. Maybe if I charm enough rich strangers, one of them will throw me a bone. He closed the bedroom door, leaving Grace with the bills, the humming fridge, and 3 restless lives under her skin. She tidied the table slowly, thoughts drifting back to the TV image of Richard Hale saying, legacy and succession. Her father had wanted to make sure she'd never see a late fee in her life. She had insisted on another path. She'd chosen Ethan, chosen love over control. Now love was pacing behind a closed door, furious with the weight of the life they'd chosen. The next evening, Ethan stood in front of their small bathroom mirror, fighting with a tie that refused to sit straight. His suit was old and shiny at the elbows. He looked like a boy trying on a costume. Grace watched from the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other on her belly. You look handsome, she said. He snorted. I look like a waiter who got lost. If you were a waiter, you'd get good tips, she said, trying to tease a smile out of him. You're charming when you're not panicking. He huffed, but a corner of his mouth twitched. I'll try not to trip over any CEOs, he said. The launch event was everything their apartment wasn't. High ceilings, polished floors, soft music. People in tailored suits floated across the room like they'd been born in them. Screens showed glossy clips of the company's new product. Ethan's manager clapped him on the back. This is your chance, Reed, he said loudly. Smile, shake hands, don't embarrass us. Then, without warning, he shoved a tray of sample boxes into Ethan's hands and walked off to greet a cluster of investors. So Ethan, the man who couldn't pay rent, stood near the back like an underdressed server. That was how Vanessa Cole saw him. She was in her mid-40s, in a simple but expensive dress, hair smooth, lipstick neat. She was a known investor in several companies, the kind of woman whose interests could rearrange a person's future. She stepped back just in time to avoid him as he nearly collided with her. Careful, she said, steadying the tray with one hand so nothing fell. These people treat packaging like it's made of glass. He flushed. Sorry. First time at one of these things. You work here? She asked, assessing him. Sales, he said, shifting the tray. Small accounts. Trying to move up. Married? She asked, as casually as if she were asking about product specs. He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Kids? He swallowed. Triplets on the way, he said. Any day now. We're not really ready. She smiled. Not warmly, not coldly. Calculating. You look like someone whose ambition doesn't match his life yet, Vanessa said. Not someone built to stay stuck carrying everyone else. Before he could form an answer, someone called her name. She turned away with the easy grace of someone who never worried about rent. But the words clung to him. Later, after speeches and applause, Ethan ducked to the bar at the edge of the hall. His feet hurt. His pride hurt more. He ordered a drink and reached for his wallet, already counting the cost. A slim hand placed a platinum card on the counter. I've got it, Vanessa's voice said. He turned. She slid onto the stool beside him. You don't have to. It's one drink, she cut in. I spend more than this on parking. He fell quiet. She studied him over the rim of her glass. Some people stay broke because they're loyal to the wrong life, Vanessa said softly. Wrong job, wrong partner, wrong story about who they are. His mouth went dry. He thought of the bills on the table, Grace's tired smile, 3 cribs they still hadn't bought. If you ever decide you're done carrying extra weight, she said, reaching into her clutch. Call me. I don't do charity. I do investments in people who want out. She slid a crisp, white business card toward him. Vanessa Cole. Private investments. A direct number was printed below. Before she left, she casually took his phone, saved her number as Vanessa, New Start, and made him call at once so she'd have his contact too. When Ethan got home, the apartment was dark except for the small lamp by the couch. Grace lay there sleeping, one hand on her belly, face soft with exhaustion. Beside her, on the coffee table, sat a small stack of unopened mail and a thick, legal-looking envelope with a crest at the top. He almost reached for it, then stopped. Whatever it was, it could wait. Everything in their life already felt like one more demand. Grace shifted on the couch, brow furrowing. "Ethan?" she whispered, eyes still closed. He flinched and moved his hand away from the mail. "It's nothing," he said. "Just the post. Go back to sleep." Later in the dark bedroom, Grace's breathing evened out beside him. Ethan lay stiff on his back, Vanessa's card resting on his chest. His phone lit up. Unknown number. Vanessa. Still thinking about change? The glow lit his face. His thumb hovered over the screen, shaking. On the other side of the wall, 3 unborn hearts beat inside the woman who trusted him. He had no idea that the next time his phone buzzed, it would be from a hospital, and he would be asked brutally clearly which life he truly belonged to. Grace's scream cut through the apartment. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice through Ethan's half-sleep. He jolted upright on the couch, TV glow flickering against the walls. Grace stood in the doorway, one hand clamped on the frame, the other clutching her belly. Dark wetness streamed down her leggings, puddling on the floor. "Ethan," she gasped, face drained of color. "My water. It broke." For one frozen second, he just stared. Triplets. No savings, no rent. Then panic kicked in. He grabbed the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago. His keys, her coat, too many things at once. Okay, we have to go," he babbled. "Can you walk, Grace?" She nodded, teeth clenched, breathing hard. He wrapped an arm around her and helped her down the stairs, every contraction stealing her words. In the car, the only sounds were Grace's quiet moans and his shaky promises. "You'll be fine," he said. "We'll be fine. Just hang on." Her phone buzzed in her bag. His buzzed in his pocket. For the first stretch of road, he ignored his. At a red light, he risked a glance. Vanessa Cole. New message. "I'm leaving for a trip tomorrow. If you want to talk about your future, it has to be tonight." He locked the screen quickly, heart pounding. Grace didn't see. She had her eyes squeezed shut, counting breaths. He pressed his foot harder on the gas. By the time they reached the hospital, Grace was sweating, breathing in rapid bursts. Nurses hurried her into a wheelchair. "I'm Nurse Linda," said a middle-aged nurse with kind eyes and a firm voice. "Triplets? All right, you came to the right place. We've got a plan." Linda looked like someone who'd seen every kind of birth. Lines around her eyes said she'd watched joy and tragedy both and learned to move through them. They got Grace into a room, into a gown, onto monitors. Dr. Singh, a calm man in his early 40s, introduced himself, checked her, and gave quick instructions. "Early but not unexpected for triplets," he said. "Our priority is to keep all 3 babies and you safe. This may take hours. We'll monitor you closely." Grace nodded, gripping the bedsheet. Ethan stood by her side, one of her hands in his, the other in his pocket, fingers brushing Vanessa's card. He tried to breathe with her in, out, but every beep of the monitor threw numbers at him that only he could hear. Rent, debt, diapers, formula. Nurse Linda glanced between them as she adjusted the fetal monitor. "Triplets are tough," she said to Grace, a smile softening her words. "Good thing you've got him, huh?" Grace looked up at Ethan, eyes glassy but full of faith. "He always finds a way," she said, panting between contractions. "He's just stressed." Her voice was protective. She was still covering for him, even now. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. He shifted, letting go of her hand for a moment. "I'll just call the insurance, make sure everything's set," he said quickly. "I'll be right outside, okay?" Grace nodded, squeezing her eyes shut as another wave of pain rolled through her. Ethan stepped into the hallway and, instead of turning toward the billing office, kept walking until the cool night air hit his face outside the sliding doors. He pulled out his phone. Another message from Vanessa. "Tell me where you are." He typed with stiff fingers. "Hospital." She's in labor. Her reply came almost instantly. Meet me outside. 2 minutes. He looked back through the glass. From here, he could only see shapes moving behind curtains, nurses going in and out. Then he looked toward the street. Headlights washed over the entrance as a black car pulled up, exactly like she'd said. The passenger window slid down. Vanessa sat inside, calm, as if she were arriving at a dinner reservation. Dark coat over a fitted dress. Hair pinned neatly. Ethan walked closer, drawn like metal to a magnet. Shouldn't you be upstairs with her? Vanessa asked mildly. Isn't this the big moment? She's with the doctors, he said. They said it could take a while. Vanessa studied his face, the fear, the exhaustion, the resentment. You look like a man on a sinking ship, she said quietly, still pretending he can plug every hole with his bare hands. It's my family, Ethan said hoarsely. What am I supposed to do? Walk away? You can stay, she said, and drown in bills for 3 screaming babies. Work double shifts, lose your mind, lose your marriage, because you're both too tired and angry to even talk. She leaned forward slightly. Or, she continued, you can let me pull you out. I can put you in a better job, in a better place. You're not a waiter, you're not a small-time salesman. With my backing and my lawyer, you start over clean. But I don't do half measures, Ethan. If you come with me, you come alone. No financial chains, no custody drama. My lawyer knows how to handle complications. His throat dried out. I can't just abandon my kids, he said. But even to his own ears, it sounded weak. You're not the first man who realizes he wasn't built for this kind of life, Vanessa said, her voice gentle but merciless. The law has processes. You sign. You step back legally. She gets full control. You're free. She gets to be the strong single mother everyone praises. You get your second chance. Everyone plays the role they're best at. Through the glass, he glimpsed a corner of Grace's bed, the curve of her body under hospital sheets, nurses moving quickly around her. He imagined himself in a year. 3 car seats, 3 crying babies, a wife too exhausted to look at him, a landlord threatening them at the door. I'm not a monster, Vanessa added. I'm offering you a life that fits you. But this window closes tonight. His heart hammered. The night, the beeping inside, the car idling, it all blended into a single, suffocating choice. I can't do this, he whispered. He didn't specify what this was. He walked around the car and got in. The door shut. The car pulled away. Inside, Nurse Linda came back into the room. The monitors beeped steadily. Where's my husband? Grace asked, voice thin, sweat dripping down her temple. Nurse Linda hesitated. She hadn't seen him in the hall. I'm sure he'll be right back, she said, even though uncertainty tugged at her gut. Labor blurred into a long, shaky stretch of time. Dr. Singh's voice came and went with instructions. Nurses called out numbers. Grace clung to the rails, to Nurse Linda's hand, to the idea that Ethan would walk back in at any moment. He never did. When the first baby's cry finally cracked through the air, she sobbed in relief. A girl, someone said. She's small but breathing. Mia, Grace whispered. Then another cry. A boy. Liam. Then a third, weaker but still there. Noah. 3 tiny humans arrived earlier than planned, under bright lights and careful hands. Grace got the briefest look at each of them before they were whisked to the neonatal unit for monitoring. Her arms felt impossibly empty. Ethan was nowhere. Nurse Linda swallowed down the anger burning in her chest. She'd seen nervous fathers. She'd seen overwhelmed fathers. She had rarely seen no father at all. The next morning, Ethan sat in a polished office across from a man in a suit. Vanessa's attorney, Mr. Clark, slid a stack of documents across the desk. This is a petition to terminate your parental rights and an agreement requesting that you not be pursued for child support, Clark explained. You're saying you do not wish to be involved in these children's lives in any capacity, legal or financial. And that means they can't come after me for money later? Ethan asked quietly. If the court approves, Clark said, you'll have no legal obligations. You'll also have no legal rights. No custody, No visitation, no say in anything. Ethan's pen hovered for a moment over the signature line. Then he thought of rent notices, of triplet cribs, of diapers stacked to the ceiling. He thought of Vanessa waiting outside this same building, promising an apartment where the bills would always be paid. He signed. The lawyer explained that the petition would still need to go before a family court judge, but to Ethan it already felt final, like he'd cut the last thread tying him to that hospital room. Somewhere far away, in another office with different glass walls and thicker carpets, a man named Richard Hale glanced at a note his assistant placed on his desk. Your daughter, last known as Grace, has given birth. Location, County Medical. He stared at the message for a long time, then at the stack of returned letters bearing the same name. He didn't know it yet, but the choices being made in both offices that day were about to pull his lost daughter back toward his world. All three babies started crying at once. Their thin wails filled the small hospital room like an alarm. One in the clear crib by the window, one in a tiny cot near Grace's bed, one in Nurse Linda's arms. Grace swung her legs over the edge of the bed too fast and winced. Her body was still recovering, muscles weak, incisions sore, head light. She grabbed the rail, determined to stand anyway. I've got him, sweetheart, Nurse Linda said over the noise. Sit. Breathe. Linda rocked one baby gently and nudged the second crib closer with her foot. You sure there's no one coming to help you? She asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd checked the visitor log twice. Grace's eyes flicked to the empty doorway. No, she said softly. It's just me. 2 days after the birth, a hospital clerk had brought in a courier envelope with Ethan's name on it. The abandonment agreement from Ethan lay folded in the bedside drawer. His message, "This is best for everyone," still stung every time she blinked. She hadn't signed. She hadn't thrown it away either. It felt like holding a live wire, not knowing whether to drop it or wrap it around her hand. Outside, a hospital assistant wheeled a cart toward her door. On it were 3 donated blankets and a box of gently used baby clothes, a note taped to the lid. For the Reed triplets. Reality didn't arrive gently. It crashed in all at once. Food, diapers, rent, hospital bills, 3 fragile babies, 2 hands. By the time Grace finally made it home, the sun was low and her energy nearly gone. The hospital had arranged transport an old van instead of a taxi, driven by a volunteer who carefully lifted each carrier inside. The ride itself felt like a blur. The apartment door swung open to the same faded couch, the same crooked picture, the same stack of unpaid bills on the table. But Ethan's shoes were gone. His jacket, his presence. The absence felt loud. Thank you, Grace whispered to the young volunteer who carried in the last baby. He smiled awkwardly. They're beautiful, he said, then left her alone. Silence lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then Mia fussed. Liam followed. Noah, not wanting to be left out, scrunched his face and joined in. Grace moved like someone carrying a weight twice her size and refusing to set any of it down. She fed Mia first, then carefully laid her on a folded blanket on the couch. She shifted Liam, trying to get him to latch. Noah kicked and wailed in his seat. 10 minutes later, Grace sat in the old armchair, head tipped back, Liam nursing, Mia dozing, Noah squirming in her lap. Her eyes burned with exhaustion. On the table beside her, unpaid bills leaned against a brown envelope from a different law firm, the copy of Ethan's petition that had been delivered to the hospital and now followed her home. His signature was clear. The space for hers was blank. A key turned in the lock. Grace? Rachel's voice called. Come in, Grace said, too tired to stand. Rachel nudged the door open with her shoulder, arms loaded with grocery bags. She stopped dead when she saw the 3 babies and the dark circles under Grace's eyes. Oh my God, Rachel breathed. You're home. She dumped the bags on the counter and hurried over. Which one can I hold? She asked immediately, hands already hovering. That's Noah, Grace said, easing him over. He's the loudest. Liam's hungry. Mia just watches everything. Rachel cradled Noah, swaying without being told. Her gaze landed on the legal envelope and the pages sticking out. What's that? She asked. Grace followed her eyes and swallowed. She didn't answer fast enough. Carefully balancing Noah, Rachel stepped closer and read the top page. Her face changed mid-sentence. "You're kidding," she said. "Grace, this is Ethan's name. I am voluntarily stepping away from all parental rights. No child support." She looked up, eyes flaring. "You're going to raise 3 kids alone," Rachel said, voice shaking, "while he runs off and pretends none of this exists?" Grace stared down at her own hands. They were trembling. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she whispered. "I don't even know how to get through tonight." Rachel's anger stayed, but her tone softened. "There has to be someone," she said. "Some kind of help, some kind of backup. You never talk about family, but you have someone, right?" The word family hit a locked door inside Grace. She closed her eyes. "I have one more person I can call," she said slowly, "but I swore I never would." Rachel watched her closely. "Who?" she asked. Grace reached for the drawer where she'd shoved another envelope, the one Ethan had turned over that night and pretended not to see. Hale and Partners Legal, the same crest as her pendant in the top corner. Inside, a short letter from Mark Jensen, her father's longtime lawyer, with a phone number that never changed. Her shoulders tensed and straightened at the same time. "My father," she said. Then, as if confessing, "Richard Hale." Rachel froze. "The Richard Hale?" she whispered. "From the news? The factories? Grace, are you saying you're—" "I was," Grace cut in. "A long time ago. I left. I changed my name. I thought if I built a life with Ethan, it would be mine. No conditions. No control." She looked at the babies. "It didn't turn out very normal," she added, a cracked smile on her lips. Rachel blinked hard. "You had a safety net this whole time," she said, not accusing, just stunned. "Why haven't you called him?" "Because he wanted to own everything," Grace said. "Including me. I didn't want to be managed like an asset. I wanted to choose my own life." Silence stretched, filled only by tiny squeaks and snuffles. "And now?" Rachel asked gently. Grace glanced at the bills. At Ethan's agreement. At 3 tiny faces. "Now," she said, "it's not just about me anymore." Later that night, after Rachel left and the babies finally overlapped in sleep for the first time, the apartment felt so quiet it buzzed. Grace sat at the table. The Hale and Partners letter lay open in front of her, Mark's name and direct line at the top. Her hands shook as she dialed. The call rang once, twice. "Hale and Partners Legal. This is Mark Jensen," came the smooth, controlled voice. Grace swallowed. "This is—" Her tongue tripped over the old name. "This is Grace Hale. I need to speak to my father." Silence. She could practically hear Mark's brain checking and rechecking what he just heard. "Miss Hale?" he said at last, layers of formality returning all at once. "Are you safe?" Grace looked around the cramped room, peeling paint, 3 mismatched cribs, a stack of bills. "I have 3 newborns," she said, "and no husband." Mark exhaled a quiet sound of surprise and calculation. "All right," he said, voice now focused. "Here's what we're going to do. I'll brief your father immediately. In the meantime, do not sign anything your ex-husband sent you, especially if it involves your children or child support. Do you have any such documents?" Grace's eyes flicked to Ethan's agreement on the table, his signature glaring. "Yes," she said. "He wants me to sign away his responsibilities." "Do not sign," Mark repeated firmly. "Keep every page. If you authorize me, I will handle it. I'll call you back within a few hours." "What does my father say?" she asked quietly. "If he even wants to hear about me." "He doesn't know everything yet," Mark replied. "But he has been trying to find you for years. Letters, notices. We never had confirmation you were safe. I think." His voice softened just a fraction. "I think he always hoped for this call." Noah stirred in a crib. Mia sighed in her sleep. Liam stretched a tiny hand against the side of his cot. "Please call me back," Grace said. "I don't know how long I can keep this up alone." "You won't have to," Mark said. "Not much longer." After the call ended, night folded back in, around her feeds, diaper changes, pacing the floor. At some blurry point, the phone rang again. Grace snatched it up on the first ring. "Miss Hale," Mark said. "I've spoken with your father." Her breath caught. "And?" she asked. "He said," Mark replied, "tell my daughter to come home, and tell her I want to meet my grandchildren before it's too late." Grace looked at the three little bundles sleeping in second-hand cribs. Her fingers closed around a pen. But instead of signing Ethan's agreement, she signed the legal authorization Mark had emailed, and she'd printed at the corner shop, giving Hale and Partners the right to represent her fully. She wrote her name clearly, Grace Hale. As the ink dried, she couldn't see the estate gates already opening in preparation, or the old man checking his watch, waiting to see if the daughter who once ran from him would walk through them again, this time with three new heirs in her arms. All three babies started crying the moment the gates opened. The sound bounced off stone pillars and iron bars as the car rolled up the long driveway. Grace's heart raced with every meter they moved deeper into the world she'd run from. At the entrance, a guard had leaned into the window earlier, checked a list, and picked up the phone. "Mr. Hale," he'd said quietly. "She's here." Now the car crept through familiar territory, tall trees in straight lines, trimmed lawns like green carpets, and finally the house that wasn't really a house at all, but an estate. Grace clutched Mia's carrier on her lap. Liam and Noah, strapped in their own seats, squirmed and cried. Their faces were still so small that the straps seemed almost too big. They had no idea where they were or what this driveway meant. "Almost there," the driver said softly. Grace swallowed. "Thank you." The car stopped at the foot of the wide stone steps. Before she could reach for the door handle, the front door opened. Richard Hale stepped out. He was older now, more gray than dark. The straight shoulders, the precise suit, the commanding presence were all still there, only softened around the edges by years and regrets. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the babies cried again, sharp and insistent, and something cracked in his expression. He walked down the steps slowly, like each step carried a memory. His eyes went from Grace's tired face to the three carriers. "You came," he said at last, voice low. Grace nodded. Her throat burned. "These are my grandchildren?" he asked. "This is Mia," she said, touching the first carrier. "Liam and Noah." He looked at each tiny face as if trying to memorize them before they could change. The industrial magnate disappeared. The grandfather stood in his place. "Bring them inside," he said. "You must be exhausted." Inside, the house smelled the same polished wood, expensive soap, faint coffee from some distant kitchen. The floors gleamed. The ceilings soared. Every wall carried framed photographs, factory openings, charity galas, handshakes with important people. Today, 3 baby carriers rested on a low table in one of the sitting rooms. Mark Jensen stood when they entered, file in hand. He looked just like he had sounded on the phone. Neat, precise, alert. "Miss," he started, then adjusted. "Grace." "Mark," she said, giving a small nod. A staff member fussed with extra cushions and quietly slipped out, closing the door behind him. The room shrank to just them. Grace, Richard, Mark, and 3 small bundles of noise and need. "You look tired," Richard said. "You shouldn't have had to do all this alone." Grace's jaw clenched. "I wouldn't have had to," she replied softly, "if he had stayed." Richard's face tightened at the mention of Ethan, even though he'd never met the man. "This is what we argued about," he said. "All those years ago." The past walked into the room and sat down beside them. She remembered being 19 at this same estate, sitting at the long dining table while her father closed a deal. He'd talked about merging families, about aligning interests. Her name had floated between numbers and terms. After dinner, her mother had taken her aside into a quiet study. "Your father loves you," her mother had said gently, "but he speaks in contracts. He thinks securing your future is the same as securing a deal." "I don't want to be a deal," young Grace had whispered. "I want to be a person." Her mother had smoothed her hair and given a sad little smile. The day everything exploded, the whole house heard. "I will not marry someone you picked out of a spreadsheet," 22-year-old Grace had shouted in this very room. I want a normal life, someone who loves me. Not my last name. You have no idea what real life is. Richard had snapped back. Normal life is not romantic. It's bills and fear and people taking advantage of you. I am trying to protect you from that. I'd rather be broke and loved than rich and owned, she'd cried. So she'd left, with a small suitcase, some cash, and her mother's pendant. She changed her name, found Ethan, and promised herself she'd never use the hail power. Until now. Back in the present, Grace met her father's eyes. You were right about one thing, she said. Normal life is bills and fear. He looked at the bruise-colored shadows under her eyes, at the second-hand clothes on the babies. And now? He asked quietly. Do you still want to do it without help? She turned to the carriers. Liam's tiny fist twitched. Mia's chest rose and fell in quick breaths. Noah kicked against the blanket. No, she said simply. Not if my pride hurts them. Richard sank into a chair, movements slower than she remembered. Years had finally caught up with him. I will help you, he said. I will make sure these children are provided for and protected, but I won't do it halfway. No more hiding, no more pretending you're not who you are. Mark stepped forward and opened his folder. We already have your authorization, he said. That lets us act on your behalf. First, we file for divorce on grounds of abandonment. We attach the petition he filed to terminate his rights, the messages he sent, the hospital records showing he was not present at the birth. He flipped to another document. Second, we ask the court to confirm what he requested, a full legal termination of his parental rights. This time we make sure it's done properly through the court, with the children's best interests protected. That makes his current agreement binding, and it prevents him from changing his mind in a way that would harm them later. Grace gripped the back of the chair. He walks away clean? She asked quietly. No child support? No help? After what he did? In practical terms, yes, Mark said, but that's the path he chose. The upside is that once his rights are terminated, he has no say, no claim, no leverage. Legally, he becomes a stranger. Between your own capacity, your father's resources, and the structures we'll build, you won't need his money. And in 20 years, if he ever comes back, we'll have this file ready. He lifted a thin folder labeled on the tab. Read. Parental rights termination. Contingency. Richard added. At the same time, we can set up immediate trust funds for each child. They won't touch most of it until they're older, but it will grow. We'll plan their education, their training, their future roles in the company. This isn't a fairy tale rescue, Mark said. It's structure, protection. You walked away from this structure once. I'm offering you the chance to use it on your terms. Richard looked at her. You will be trained too, he said. You will sit on boards. You will learn everything you once refused to learn. If someone hurt you because you tried to live small, then we'll make sure no one can touch you when you stand tall. Grace's chest ached. On one condition, she said. Both men looked at her. They will know, she said, nodding at the babies, that I was poor once, that we counted coins, that someone walked away from them when they had nothing. They will know what power can do to people and what abandonment feels like, and they will never become the kind of person who uses others and throws them away. Not you, Father, not Ethan, not them. Richard studied her. Pride, regret, and something like relief flickered in his eyes. Then, we do it your way, he said. Mark closed the folder with a soft click and slid Ethan's agreement into the contingency file. We'll file the petition within the week, he said. We'll also quietly pay the hospital bills in full and redirect any communication from his lawyer to our office. For now, you focus on recovering and learning how to be a mother of 3. We'll handle the judges. Grace exhaled slowly. The babies stirred in their carriers, tiny fists flexing, faces scrunching briefly before relaxing again, unaware that their lives had just been tied to trust structures, board seats, and an empire they hadn't chosen. And that, somewhere across town, a man named Ethan Reed had just signed himself out of that future with a stroke of a pen 10 years later. The noise in the factory hit them like a wave, Machines roared. Machines roared. Conveyor belts rattled. Forklifts beeped as they shifted crates from one end of the floor to the other. The air smelled of oil, metal, and hot plastic. "Stay close to me," Richard Hale shouted over the sound. Beside him walked 3 10-year-olds in small safety vests and helmets that kept sliding down their foreheads. Mia, the eldest by 3 minutes, kept pushing hers back and staring at everything with sharp, curious eyes. Liam clutched a small notebook and pen. Noah held a tablet almost as big as his chest. They were the Hale triplets now in the eyes of the world, even if an old Reed still sat in the father's box on their birth certificates. The same babies who had gone home from the hospital and donated clothes now walked through a factory their grandfather owned. Richard stopped with them on a raised platform overlooking the production line. He was older, but his voice still carried. "This is where one of our main product lines is assembled," he said. "But I don't want you to look at the machines first." Mia frowned. "Then what do we look at?" "The people," Richard said. He pointed down at the workers moving along the line, checking parts, tightening bolts, lifting and sorting. "Every decision you make one day," he said, "will affect people like them, their families, their children. Never forget that." Liam scribbled fast in his notebook. "People, decisions, families?" Noah snapped a quick photo with the tablet, then zoomed in on a section of the conveyor. "There's a jam starting there," he said quietly. "See? That box keeps sliding sideways." Richard followed his gaze and raised his eyebrows. "Good eye," he said. A few steps behind them, Grace walked carefully along the metal walkway, wearing a hard hat and fitted blazer. 10 years had changed her. She still had the same soft face, but her posture was different now, shoulders back, eyes scanning for more than just exits and price tags. She was no longer just the girl who ran from money or the abandoned wife of triplets. She was a board member in training, a bridge between the life she'd chosen and the one she'd returned to. "Come on," Richard said. "I want to show you something else." He led them to a quieter area where finished goods were being boxed and labeled. A group of workers sat at a break table, laughing. One saw Richard and half stood, but Richard waved him back down. "This is Mr. Hale," the man said to the kids. "He signs our checks." Liam wrote, "Signs checks equals responsibility." Mia studied the way the workers looked at her grandfather. Respect, yes, but also a little fear. "Do they know we're your grandchildren?" she whispered to Grace. "Some do," Grace replied, "but I want them to know you for how you act, not just your name." Later that afternoon, back at the estate, the triplets sprawled on the carpet around a low table in a family room, not the formal boardroom, but a space cluttered with books, tablets, and half-built Lego models of factories. Mia's side of the table was covered in sketches, rough logos, packaging ideas, and doodles of buildings with their surnames on top. "What if we had our own brand one day?" she said. "Something new, not just Grandpa's old stuff with a different label." Liam had numbers all over his page, pretend budgets, made-up balance sheets. "If we owned 3 companies, and each made this much," he muttered, tapping his pencil, "and we reinvested it instead of spending it, we'd have..." Wait. He wrote a bigger number and circled it twice. Noah sat cross-legged with the tablet, not drawing or counting, but arranging simple blocks of code in a beginner program. "If the factory had sensors here and here," he said, pointing at a diagram on the screen, "they could warn about the jam before it starts. Then the workers wouldn't have to stop the whole line. These weren't polished business plans, they were just little sparks. But this is how empires really start, with kids paying attention and adults paying for their education." Grace watched from the couch, a report open in her lap. Her mind danced between the numbers on the page and the 3 different minds on the floor. Over the years, she'd split her life in 2. Board meetings and factory tours with Richard and Mark. Homework checks and bedtime stories with the triplets. She argued with executives now. She read reports, questioned supply chains, pushed back on Mark when she thought a deal was cold but profitable. And just as often, she insisted on another kind of lesson altogether. Every few weeks, she took the triplets, no chauffeur, no tailored clothes, just regular jackets, to visit shelters for single parents and their children. They helped pack food boxes, carried crates, played with kids who had no estates, no trust funds, no elevator that opened onto a private floor. On the way back from one of those visits when the triplets were 13, Mia finally gave the question a voice. "Mom," she said, staring out the car window, "why don't we have a dad like other kids?" The words hung in the air. Liam stopped tapping on his phone. Noah's fingers froze above the tablet. Grace's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She'd known this was coming. She could have lied. Said he lived far away. Said he worked overseas. Said one day they'd meet him. She didn't. "He chose another life instead of us," she said. "People are allowed to make choices. They are not free from the consequences of those choices." Mia turned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Grace said, choosing each word, "your father decided our life was too hard, too heavy. He left. He did not want to be responsible for 3 children and a wife with nothing." "Nothing?" Liam said softly. "We had Grandpa." "Not then," Grace replied. "When you were born, I'd already been gone from this place for years. We lived in a small apartment. We argued over rent. The 3 of you wore donated clothes home from the hospital." The triplets fell silent, trying to picture their mother not in tailored blazers, but in cheap shirts washed in a tiny sink. When they reached the estate, Grace didn't let the topic float away. She led them upstairs to her study, unlocked a lower drawer, and took out a slim file. "This is the paper your father signed," she said, "in the hospital. He sent it to me a few days after you were born." She laid the document on the desk. Mia leaned in and read the lines aloud, voice low. "Voluntarily step away from all parental rights and responsibilities." Liam scanned down to the signature. "Ethan Reed," he said. Noah stared at the name for a long time. "He signed this?" Noah asked. "Yes," Grace said. "And later, when I called your grandfather's lawyer, we used it in court. A judge terminated his rights properly. After that, he wasn't your father legally anymore, on paper or in practice." None of them said anything for a moment. "Do you hate him?" Mia asked. Grace looked at the document, then at them. "I used to," she admitted. "Now I mostly feel finished. I'm grateful for what I have, for you, for a second chance with my father, for the work we do. I don't want hatred to be one more thing we drag around." She slid the document back into the drawer and turned the key. "You are not his mistake," she said firmly. "You are my miracle. Don't ever forget that." Time moved. The image in your mind fades to black. Then white letters appear, 8 years later, now 21. A news anchor's voice cut through the flashing images on screen. Today, the Hale triplets, Mia, Liam, and Noah Hale, launched their new tech and logistics venture on the stock exchange, combining digital platforms with real-world infrastructure. Backed initially by Hale Family Capital and later by outside investors, the company's valuation has already crossed $2 billion. Clips followed. Mia, walking into a glass building beside a row of microphones, talking confidently about sustainable supply chains and community projects. Liam in a tailored suit, answering questions about long-term growth and reinvestment instead of quick cash-outs. Noah on a panel explaining how their route optimization software reduces waste and helps smaller suppliers compete. In one shot, Grace and Richard watch from the side of a stage, faces full of a quiet, hard-earned pride. Behind them, Mark stood with his arms folded, expression saying, "We did what we set out to do." They weren't just rich kids, the anchor's voice said. They were heirs with a blueprint, and they used every lesson to build something even bigger than their grandfather's empire. Far across town, in a small, dim apartment, a man in his 50s sat at a chip table. The TV was on, volume low. His hair had thinned, his shoulders softened. An almost empty bottle sat by his elbow. This was Ethan Reed. He stared at the screen without really seeing it, caught between old regrets and new worries. He rubbed his temple and reached for the remote. As his thumb hovered over the power button, the channel cut to a close-up of Mia's face, then split the screen into 3. Mia Hale, 21. Liam Hale, 21. Noah Hale, 21. Something in the tilt of Mia's chin, the exact color of Liam's eyes, the way Noah's mouth tightened when he concentrated. Ethan's hand stopped midair. He'd seen that mouth before, laughing nervously in a tiny kitchen. He'd seen those eyes in a hospital mirror over a sink, just before rushing out to make a call. Beer sloshed as his fingers loosened around the glass. On the ticker at the bottom, words scrolled past. Founders. Children of Industrial Board Member Grace Hale. He squinted, reading it again. Grace Hale. The remote dropped from his hand and hit the floor. Memory, long buried, started clawing its way back up. The room was holding its breath. A long glass table stretched across the main Hale Dynamics Group boardroom, where both the original company and the Triplets' new venture now held their strategy meetings. Screens on the walls glowed with charts. At the head stood Mia Hale, 21, dark hair pulled back, gaze steady. On either side of her sat Liam and Noah, their laptops open, notes prepared. Around them, older executives, analysts, and advisors waited, some skeptical, some intrigued. On the main screen behind them, a slide read, Proposed Acquisition, Strategic Merge Phase 1. Mia tapped the remote. If we move first, she said, we don't just buy a company, we buy time. We secure a key part of our logistics pipeline so our software doesn't depend on third-party bottlenecks. Over 3 years, we cut waste by at least 12%. She turned toward Liam. Liam? He stood, tablet in hand. The numbers support the strategy, he said. We stress-tested 3 worst-case scenarios: global slowdown, regulatory delays, supply disruptions. In all 3, our position stays stable or improves. In our median case, we increase long-term value for every shareholder and partner represented here. He stepped back. On cue, Noah rose and moved to a console near the wall. He plugged in his device, and the screens changed to a live interface. The platform we built, Noah said, doesn't just track shipments, it learns. It identifies risk points before they become stoppages and reroutes in real time. That's how we protect our people and our commitments, not just our bottom line. Lines lit up over a digital map like veins. For a moment, the room was quiet. Then, one by one, people started nodding. A few executives muttered to each other. Someone near the end of the table said, "They've thought it through." At the far side, Grace and Richard sat side by side. Grace's hands were clasped tight in her lap, but her eyes were bright, proud. Richard watched with an expression that struggled to be stern and failed. There was too much pride leaking through. After the board voted, after the legal team began prepping term sheets, the triplets walked down the corridor to a smaller studio. In a media room lined with lights and cameras, the siblings sat for an interview. The host smiled across at them. "You 3 built a company now valued at over $2 billion, she said. "You're also taking active roles in your grandfather's industrial group. People look at you and see success. What inspired you?" Mia answered, without glancing at her brothers. "Our mother," she said. "She raised us alone for a long time and brought us back here when she could have stayed away. She taught us that loyalty is worth more than money and that power without conscience is dangerous. Everything we build comes from that." In the control room behind the glass, Grace watched with tears blurring the monitors. Richard stood stiff beside her, pretending to look only at the signal quality. "They mean it," she whispered. "Of course they do," Richard muttered, though his voice was rougher than usual. On the other side of town, the sound of a phone slamming onto glass echoed through an expensive living room. "You promised that startup would triple our money." Vanessa Cole's voice cut through the air. She tossed a printed statement onto the coffee table. Numbers glared up in red. They were standing in a home that still looked wealthy at first glance, designer furniture, framed art, but the cracks were showing. Mail piled on a sideboard. Empty glasses lingered on surfaces too long. Ethan sat on the couch, older and softer, staring at the page. He still carried a hint of the man who once marched into a hospital panicking about rent, but now the panic was slower, duller, soaked in years of bad choices. "I didn't promise anything," he muttered. The market shifted. No one saw it coming. Vanessa's laugh was short and sharp. "No," she said. "You saw a chance to look like a genius. You poured everything into it. My money, my contacts, my reputation, and now look where we are." He took a drink from the glass in his hand, but it didn't make him any braver. "You don't sell anymore," she shot back. "You don't work a real job. You sit here and chase big ideas that go nowhere. People used to say I had an eye for talent. Now they say I've been dragging dead weight for 10 years. He flinched as if she'd slapped him. "I left everything for you," he said. "I walked out on your problems," she snapped. "You walked out on your problems and thought that made you smart." She grabbed a suitcase from near the door. It was already packed. "I'm not here to babysit a man who can't pull his weight," Vanessa said. "Not then. Not now." The words were almost the same ones she'd spoken outside the hospital so many years ago, but this time there was no promise of a better life waiting, just the echo of her own words thrown back at him. His voice came out small. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done," she said. "Some people just stay broke because they're loyal to the wrong life." The exact same line she'd once used to lure him away from his family now pushed him out of hers. The door shut behind her with a clean, expensive click. A few nights later, Ethan sat on a cracked bar stool in a dim bar that smelled of spilled beer and old arguments. A muted TV above the counter was tuned to a business channel, one of the only channels that came through clearly. He stared at his beer, not at the screen. The bartender reached for the remote and turned up the volume. "Coming up next," the presenter said, "an inside look at the youngest billionaire founders in the country." Ethan looked up, more out of habit than curiosity. A headline appeared. "Exclusive. The Hale triplets inside the billionaire siblings empire." He frowned. "Hale," he murmured. The name brushed past that half-formed memory again. Then the screen filled with the faces of Mia, Liam, and Noah, stepping out of a car and into a building through a crowd of cameras. Their ages flashed beneath their names. Mia Hale, 21. Liam Hale, 21. Noah Hale, 21. The glass slipped from his fingers. Beer tipped onto the bar. "Hey," the bartender barked. "Watch it." Ethan didn't answer. He leaned forward, squinting, as the lower third changed. "Children of business leader Grace Hale. Grace. Hale. Grace. Hale." He heard both names in his mind overlapped with a faded memory of an envelope on a cheap coffee table years ago. Hale and Partners Legal. Addressed to Grace Hale. He shoved a few crumpled notes toward the bartender without counting and stumbled out into the night, heart pounding. Back home, the house felt empty without Vanessa's perfume or sharp footsteps. Ethan went to the hall closet and dragged out an old cardboard box marked with a date from over 20 years ago. Inside, old pay stubs, wrinkled flyers, a spare remote, an expired insurance card, and a stiff envelope with a small crest at the top. Hale and Partners Legal. He stared. The symbol was identical to the one on his TV an hour ago, and to the one that had hung on Grace's necklace their entire marriage. Beneath it lay a crumpled, unsigned copy of the agreement he'd once kept as his own record, the petition to terminate his parental rights, given to him by his lawyer back then. His own name glared up at him. Ethan Reed. He sank down onto the floor, papers scattered around him like the pieces of a life he'd refused to look at. For the first time, Ethan truly understood what he'd walked away from. Not in abstract, not in theory. He had signed himself out of a family that had become a dynasty, and there was a public record to prove it. The shouting started before the glass doors even closed behind him. "I'm their father," Ethan Reed's voice cracked across the Hale Dynamics lobby. "I need to see them. Mia, Liam, and Noah Hale. Now." He looked small against the high ceiling and polished marble. Faded shirt, worn jeans, an old blazer that didn't quite fit. Business people in suits slowed, stared, then kept walking. The receptionist froze mid-sentence. Two security guards at the front desk stepped forward. "Sir," one said, voice firm but calm, "you can't raise your voice here. Who are you trying to see?" "My children," Ethan said. The words still felt foreign. "They're my children. Mia, Liam, Noah. I need to talk to them. It's important." The guard tapped at a tablet, scrolling through a list. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ethan Reed." The guard checked again, then shook his head slightly. "You're not on any approved list," he said. You don't have an appointment, and there's a media policy. If you'd like to request a meeting, you can email. I'm not some fan. Ethan snapped. I'm their father. The second guard moved closer. If you don't calm down, we'll have to ask you to leave, he said. Ethan's eyes jumped to the huge logo on the wall, Hale Dynamics, with the crest heavy above it. He thought of the TV interview, the news ticker, the Hale letter in his box. He couldn't just walk out. What's going on? Asked a new voice. The air seemed to quiet around it. Mark Jensen stepped into the lobby from a side corridor. He wore a dark suit, glasses, and an expression that said he was used to solving problems before they became headlines. The first guard turned to him. This man is trying to get upstairs without clearance, Mr. Jensen, he said. Says he's the Hale triplets' father. Mark looked at Ethan properly. Recognition clicked into place. You're Ethan Reed, Mark said. Ethan swallowed. Yes. The guards exchanged a look. Is there a problem? One asked. No, Mark said after a beat. I'll handle it. Please note his arrival, politely. He gestured down the hallway. Come with me, Mr. Reed, Mark said. We'll talk in my office. The walk was short but felt long. Ethan's footsteps echoed on the polished floor. Employees glanced up as they passed, then looked away when they saw Mark. Inside Mark's office, shelves lined the walls, full of files and reference books. One filing cabinet drawer near the bottom bore an old label. Reed, Parental Rights Termination, Contingency. Grace wasn't there. Neither were the triplets. Sit, Mark said, closing the door behind them. Ethan dropped into the chair like someone whose legs had stopped trusting him. I saw them on TV, he began. The segment. Then I found the letter. The crest. The paper I signed. He shook his head. I didn't know who she really was back then. I didn't know what I was walking away from. I was stupid. I panicked. His voice cracked. I know I made bad choices, he said, but I'm still their father. I want a chance to be in their lives. And his eyes flickered around the room, over the framed degrees, the view of the city, and maybe what's fair financially. I gave them my name, my blood. Isn't there something? He trailed off, ashamed of how it sounded even to him. Mark steepled his fingers and watched him quietly. Mr. Reed, he said at last, you signed away any claim to those children, voluntarily, in front of your own counsel. We took your petition and finalized it through the family court system years ago. Ethan blinked. Finalized? Yes, Mark said. There is a court order terminating your parental rights. You requested it. You accepted its terms. He let that sink in. Grace and the children have lived under that protection ever since, Mark continued. You provided no support, no contact, no attempt at contact. They built their lives without you. Ethan spread his hands helplessly. I was young, he said. I was broke. I'd just found out she'd been hiding. She came from this. He gestured vaguely, meaning the building, the money, the crest. She lied to me. Correction, Mark said, calm but firm. She did not tell you something. There is a difference between concealment and simply not volunteering information. More importantly, when you made your choice at that hospital, you did not know she was a Hale. You knew she was your wife. You knew she was carrying your 3 children. That should have been enough. Ethan closed his mouth. So that's it? He said finally. I never see them? I get nothing? You're asking 2 different questions, Mark replied. Seeing them is about their emotional safety. Money is about the law and previous agreements. As their counsel, my job is to protect them in both areas. He leaned back slightly. If you want to challenge the old court order, Mark said, the system allows you to file a case. You have that right. But if you open that door, you open everything. The hospital records, the termination order, the financial history showing you paid nothing for them, witness statements, your old messages, your own signature. You'll drag me through the mud, Ethan murmured. I won't have to drag you anywhere, Mark said quietly. The truth will sit there on the record. Ethan looked down at his hands. What if I really am sorry? He asked. What if I'd come even if they weren't rich? Mark studied him. Then your first move wouldn't be walking into this building and arguing about what you deserve, he said. You'd have gone to a therapist, a pastor, a shelter. You'd have asked how to apologize without causing more harm. He let that hang there for a moment. But the law isn't about how sorry you are, Mark added. It's about what you did. Silence swallowed the room. Ethan inhaled slowly. Something desperate settled over his features. Then I'll let a judge decide what I deserve, he said. I have nothing left to lose. Mark weighed him for a long moment, then nodded once. If someday they ever ask to hear from you, Mark added, you can write a letter and leave it with my office. No demands, no talk of money, just an apology. Whether they open it will be their choice, not yours. Very well, he said. If you file, we will respond. After Ethan left, Mark stood and walked to the filing cabinet. His hand rested on the reed drawer for a second before he pulled it open. Then he picked up his phone. That evening, at the Hale estate, the family sat in the living room. Mia was reviewing presentation notes on her laptop. Liam scrolled through a spreadsheet on his tablet. Noah read comments on a beta rollout of their platform. Grace's phone rang. She saw Mark's name and answered. Yes, Mark? We only hear her side. He came where? She said, quietly. A pause. He wants to do what? Another pause. He's going to court? Her eyes closed briefly. I see. She listened. For a long moment, jaw tightening. If that's the route he wants, she said at last, voice steady. We'll be there. The children have a right to hear the truth in a place where it actually matters. She ended the call and looked up. 3 pairs of eyes were on her. Her children didn't know it yet, but the next room they'd share with Ethan Reed wouldn't be a conference room or a private office. It would be a courtroom where every buried decision in their family's history was about to be read out loud. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. Court is now in session, the bailiff called. The Honorable Judge Daniels, presiding. The family courtroom buzzed, then quieted. Papers stopped rustling. People settled in. No cameras were allowed inside, but reporters waited outside the building like sharks. At the plaintiff's table sat Ethan Reed, older, thinner, suit hanging a little too loose. His eyes were bloodshot. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering last-minute strategy. At the defense table sat Grace Hale, calm in a simple dark dress. To her right, Mia, Liam, and Noah sat in a row, hands folded, faces composed. Behind them, Richard Hale and Mark Jensen occupied the first row of seats, backs straight. This wasn't just a case file. It was an autopsy of a family. Ethan's lawyer stood. Your Honor, he began, we are here because a man who made serious mistakes in his youth has seen his children again after many years and seeks a chance to be in their lives. He also seeks a fair acknowledgement of his contribution to the bloodline and the success that has followed. He glanced at the triplets. My client is not denying his past, the lawyer continued. He is asking this court to recognize that people can change, that termination orders can be reconsidered, and that a father should not be permanently severed from his children and their legacy when he is prepared to step up now. If you didn't know the story, it almost sounded reasonable. Mark rose slowly, buttoned his jacket, and stepped forward. Your Honor, he said, this is not a redemption hearing. This is a late attempt to profit from choices the plaintiff made decades ago. He held up a sheaf of documents. This, he said, is Mr. Reed's original petition to terminate his parental rights, signed in the presence of his own attorney. This, he held up another, is the court order that finalized that termination, at his request. And these, he rattled the stack, are hospital records and witness statements showing the circumstances under which his children were born and abandoned. He handed copies to the clerk and opposing counsel. We will show that Mr. Reed did not lose his family by accident, Mark said. He walked away, and he has been walking away ever since, until he saw their names attached to a multi-billion-dollar company. Judge Daniels nodded. Call your first witness, he said. The defense calls Nurse Linda Martinez, Mark replied. Nurse Linda, older now but still steady, took the stand and was sworn in. Miss Martinez, Mark said, where were you working 21 years ago? At County Medical, she answered. Maternity ward. Do you remember a patient named Grace Reed who gave birth to triplets? I do, Linda said. Triplets are rare. The pregnancy was high risk. The birth was early. It was hard to forget. Was her husband present? He was, when she was first admitted, she said. He stayed for a while, then said he had to make a call about insurance. He left the ward. Did he return before the children were born? No, Linda said firmly. We tried calling the number on her file when she started asking. There was no answer. He never came back while I was on duty. A murmur ran through the gallery. Thank you, Miss Martinez, Mark said. Ethan stared at the table. The defense calls Vanessa Cole. There was another stir. Vanessa entered in a modest but well-cut dress, took the oath, and sat. Miss Cole, Mark said. Do you know the plaintiff, Ethan Reed? Yes, she said calmly. We were partners for years. Do you recall a conversation outside County Medical approximately 21 years ago? She swallowed once. Yes. Where was Mr. Reed's wife at that time? In labor, Vanessa said, with triplets. And what did you tell Mr. Reed? She glanced briefly at Ethan, then back at Mark. I told him I wouldn't support 3 extra mouths, she said. I told him he had to choose between that life and the life I was offering. Did he tell you his wife came from money? Mark asked. No, Vanessa said. He said they were broke and drowning in bills. And what did he choose? He got in my car, she replied quietly. We left, Mark nodded once. No further questions. On cross-examination, Ethan's lawyer tried to suggest Vanessa had pressured him, that he was manipulated, that he didn't fully understand the consequences. But the facts stayed solid. He knew his wife, he knew the babies had no one else, and he left anyway. Then it was Grace's turn. She walked to the stand, took the oath, and sat. Mrs. Hale, Mark said, during your marriage, did you ever tell Mr. Reed that you were the daughter of Richard Hale? No, Grace said. Why? Because I didn't want to be chosen for my last name, she answered. I wanted a normal life, to build something with someone who loved me as I was, not for what I could inherit. She lifted her hand slightly. I left all of this, she said. The house, the company, the name. I did not use it to trap him. What was your financial situation during your pregnancy? Mark asked. We were behind on rent, Grace said. I worked in a small office as an assistant until I was 8 months pregnant with triplets. I took extra hours. We worried about money all the time. After the birth, Mark said, what support did Mr. Reed provide? Grace's eyes softened as she glanced at her children, then hardened again. None, she said. He sent a document through a lawyer asking me to sign away any future child support claims. He never visited the babies, never sent money, never asked how they were. When I called my father and returned here, my father, his lawyer, and I took on all responsibility. Is the success your children have today connected in any way to Mr. Reed's efforts? Mark asked. No, Grace replied. They are successful because we protected them, educated them, and because they worked. They are rich in spite of his choices, not because of them. The triplets testified next. Mia sat with her back straight. We grew up without him, she said. All we knew was a story, that he chose to leave. Our mother didn't badmouth him, but she didn't lie either. She told us he'd made a choice and that we had to decide who we wanted to be because of it. Liam followed. He didn't pay for school, Liam said. He didn't buy a single textbook or pair of shoes. He wasn't there when we were sick. He wasn't there when we launched our first project in high school. He only appeared when there was a lot to lose or gain. Noah was last. I don't hate him, Noah said quietly. I don't know him. The people who raised us, taught us, and sacrificed for us. He looked at Grace and Richard. They're the ones who have a claim on our lives. He's asking for a share of something he never helped build. After closing arguments, Judge Daniels took a long pause. Mr. Reed, he said at last, the record is clear. You voluntarily petitioned to terminate your parental rights when these children were infants. A court granted that petition. You then provided no support and made no contact for over 2 decades. He turned slightly toward the defense table. These children's success is the result of their own work and the efforts of their mother and her family, he continued. The law does not recognize any financial claim based solely on biology, especially where rights have been relinquished. He faced Ethan again. Your petition to vacate the prior termination order is denied, Judge Daniels said. You have no legal claim to their assets, their companies, or their trusts. Any personal contact with them going forward will be entirely at their discretion, not yours. He paused. As to the question of child support, he added, this court notes for the record that had you remained a legal parent, your support obligation over the years would have been substantial. While we understand you are not able to pay such a sum now, this finding is entered symbolically on the record to reflect the debt you chose not to carry. No enforcement will be sought, but the truth will be documented. He tapped the file once. Let it stand that the law recognizes what your children bore in your absence. The gavel fell. Outside, the storm waited. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Grace, over here. Mia, how do you feel about the verdict? Mr. Reed, do you have anything to say to your children? Security formed a path. Grace walked through it with Mia, Liam, and Noah around her, Richard just behind, Mark at the side. Flashbulbs erupted, but their formation stayed tight. Most cameras followed the hails. A few smaller outlets tried to get a comment from Ethan. His lawyer kept a hand on his arm and steered him away. Inside, in a quieter hallway, the Hale family paused, catching their breath. They thought it was over. Then footsteps echoed. Grace, Ethan's voice called. Mia, Liam, Noah, please, just hear me out. They turned. There he was. Verdict still fresh on his shoulders, eyes raw with something that looked like regret and desperation, tangled together. For a long second, no one said a word. Please, don't walk away from me. The words came out of Ethan Reed before he could swallow them. They hung in the courthouse hallway, caught between white walls and glass doors. Grace, Mia, Liam, and Noah turned as one. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The muffled noise from outside reporters, traffic blurred into a distant drone. In this strip of hallway, there was just the man who'd lost his case and the family he'd once walked away from. Ethan looked smaller without a lawyer beside him. No judge, no microphone, no papers to hide behind. Just a man with 21 years of absence behind him. He took a tentative step closer, stopping when a nearby security officer shifted slightly. I was scared, Ethan said, the words tumbling. That's the truth. I thought 3 of you would drown me. I didn't know how to be a father to 1 baby, never mind 3. His eyes moved from Mia's face to Liam's to Noah's, back to Grace. Vanessa promised me a different life, he went on. She said she'd pull me out of all that chaos. I thought I could just sign and walk away. Start over. I didn't know your mother came from. He gestured weakly toward the idea of the building, the money, the name. From this, he finished. For a moment, no one replied. Grace stepped forward until she stood a few meters from him. Up close, Ethan could see the lines at the corners of her eyes, the kind dug by laughter and sleepless nights both. You still think the biggest thing you left was money, she said quietly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. You didn't just walk away from money, Ethan, Grace said. You walked away from feeding them at midnight when I didn't know why they were crying. You walked away from their first steps on a used carpet in an apartment you never liked. Mia dropped her gaze, imagining it. You walked away from every school form where I had to tick, father not involved, Grace continued. From parent-teacher nights where teachers looked at the empty chair and tried not to ask. You walked away from the hospital when I was cut open, shaking, asking a nurse to please tell me you were coming back. Ethan's eyes filled. His shoulders shook. I know, he whispered. I know. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. She lifted a hand gently. I forgive you, she said. The hallway seemed to hold its breath again. Ethan stared at her, confusion cutting through his emotion. What? He asked. I forgive you, Grace repeated. Not because what you did was small, not because you earned it, because I refuse to let your choice poison the rest of my life. A tear slid down her cheek. She let it fall. I have carried enough weight for both of us, she said. I will not carry your guilt too. That is yours to deal with. Hope flickered across his face. So, does that mean forgiveness, Grace said softly, does not mean a place in our lives? The flicker died. You made your choice, she said. We lived with it. We built something without you. We healed without you. We went to court today, not to hurt you, but to protect what we built from your regret. She stepped back, letting her children fill the space beside her again. The triplets looked at each other briefly, then at him. Mia spoke first. We wish you healing, she said, voice steady. Truly. But we're not going to drag the past into our future just because you're ready to look at it now. Liam's jaw was tight, but his words were measured. We don't owe you our time, he said, or our companies, or our story. You left before the first chapter. Noah, the quietest, met Ethan's eyes last. We built our lives with the people who showed up, he said, who stayed when it was hard. That's not you. Ethan swallowed hard. He looked like he wanted to argue. There was nothing left that wouldn't make it worse. Grace turned to her children. Are you ready to go? She asked. They nodded. No screaming. No dramatics. No security dragging anyone away. The four of them simply turned and walked down the hall together. Grace in the middle, Mia, Liam, and Noah, flanking her like a living answer to the question, what happens when you stay? Ethan lifted a hand, as if reaching for something he could no longer see. They turned the corner and were gone. That night, in a very different room, another table waited. A long wooden table sat under warm lights in one of the Hale Estate's dining rooms. The atmosphere was relaxed, no reporters, no robes, no microphones. Just plates, glasses, and people who'd stood in the same storm. On one side sat Grace. On either side of her, the triplets. Across from them, Richard Hale and Mark Jensen. Between the dishes sat a simple folder with a new logo on the front, the Hale Foundation for Single Parents and Abandoned Children. Mia tapped the folder. We finalized the structure today, she said. Funding's committed. Legal framework is done. We can start awarding housing grants by the end of the quarter. Liam added. We'll focus on parents raising kids alone after abandonment or domestic desertion. No long, humiliating forms. Practical help. Rent support. Education. Micro grants for small businesses. Noah glanced at Grace. And we're building a tech platform to match donors directly with families, he said. Transparent. Measurable. People will see exactly who they're helping. Grace's eyes were wet. You're sure you want to put this much of your own money into it? She asked. Mia smiled. We wouldn't have this money without your sacrifices, she said. This is how we honor them. Richard cleared his throat. When you ran away from this house, he said to Grace, I thought you were throwing away everything I'd built. Today, I see you built something I never could have, a family with strength that doesn't come from contracts. Mark raised his glass. To the life you built, he said to Grace, and to the lives that will change because you refuse to stay a victim. They clinked glasses. The sound was quiet, solid. On the wall behind them, framed in a simple black frame, hung a larger version of the Hale crest, the same symbol that had once been a small pendant resting on Grace's skin when she sat in a cramped office pretending to be nobody. Now, the symbol didn't own her. She decided what it stood for. As they ate, a small media team filmed brief clips for the foundation's launch. Mia explaining the mission, Liam talking about impact, Noah demoing the app, Grace sharing why this work mattered. Later, those clips would go online. People who'd watched their court case headlines would stumble across a different side of the story, not just billionaires defending their wealth, but a family choosing what to do with it. Somewhere in the city, under a dim streetlight, Ethan walked alone. He passed a shop window with a muted TV inside. On the screen, a news presenter talked about the Hale Foundation. A quick video showed Grace smiling gently, the triplets standing behind her as she said, No child chooses to be abandoned. No parent should have to decide between rent and formula. We can't change the past, but we can change how many people are left to face it alone. Ethan stopped for a moment on the sidewalk and watched through the glass. Then he kept walking. He wasn't part of their story anymore. He thought leaving would free him. He didn't know the babies he refused to buy diapers for would one day buy companies, build systems, and rewrite the meaning of the name he never bothered to learn. Unaware they'd become multi-billionaires, he abandoned them for a wealthy mistress. What happened next didn't just leave him speechless. It left him watching from the outside for the rest of his life. The image in your mind zooms out, Grace laughing at the table. The triplets discussing expansion of the foundation. New files opening with new family names. New stories beginning, some with pain, many with help. Somewhere, someone watching this is thinking about a choice they still have time to make. I hope you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.